As a result of the work of our next guest and military medical pioneers, this nation has experienced a far lower combat fatality rate than what was recorded in wars prior to 9/11. By finding innovative ways to stop battlefield bleeding and restore blood to the circulation systems, our award recipient helped rehabilitate the use of tourniquets and was a practitioner of procedures that reduced mortality rates among U.S. combat casualties to 8.8% compared to 16.5% during the Vietnam War and 22.8% in World War II. Because of his success not only in the military but in his civilian medical career, he was elected president of the National Trauma Institute, where he's one of the nation's top experts in traumatic injury and leading cause of death for Americans between the age of 1 and 44. As a leader of military medical personnel, he provided life and limb saving care on the battlefield, in the back of a transport aircraft, and at military and VA medical centers and facilities around the world. He performed emergency surgeries while serving in Iraq during the Battle of Fallujah in 2004 and retired 4 years later as a colonel in the United States Air Force. He is now the director of trauma at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to present the highest honor that an organization can bestow, the American Legion Distinguished Service Medal, to Dr. Donald H. Jenkins.
Do we have slides that we can put up? Good morning. Thank you very much for this very prestigious honor. I stand here on behalf of all sorts of men and women in military medicine who have made such a difference. First, thank you to the American Legion. I'm going to tell you, Commander Dellinger, Seth Meyers and the Emmy Awards have nothing on the American Legion and you and Montel Williams and this great entertainment we've had here today. Congratulations on a fantastic National Convention. What I'd like to also do is to thank those who are really responsible for me standing here. This is not something that an individual can take credit for. There's quite a group of folks that have been working in the background, and it's because of their tireless efforts that we have been able to achieve some of those things that you heard Commander Dellinger tell us about. There are too many people to thank by name, and for fear of leaving someone out, I won't, except to shout out to the hospitality from the American Legion to my mom and my wife, who were brought here from Texas and Minnesota to visit with us here today. Injured combatants die of their wounds in a very rapid fashion. This hasn't changed since artillery was invented. And it really takes a concerted effort of all sorts of individuals to come forward and care for those casualties in a timely fashion, very timely fashion, if you're going to make a difference in life and death. The person closest to those casualties, and Sergeant White certainly epitomizes this, has got to be that self-aid buddy care. And if we don't put the right tools and training in the hands of those folks, we're not going to get anybody alive to the hospital. One of my favorite sayings is we never saved anybody's life in the operating room that hadn't already been saved before they got to us. And a big shout out to all the medics out there for all that you do. So I can't do an operation if I don't have a blood bank, don't have a lab, don't have logisticians, don't have folks that fix all the equipment, et cetera. We sort of get the glamorous end of this thing, but we couldn't do the first bit of that if it weren't for all of those supporting staff and pharmacy and x-ray and you name it. It's a whole group effort. To save those lives, we had to provide early life and limb-saving care, hemorrhage control, et cetera. This is a picture from the operating room during Operation Phantom Fury in 2004, when 292 of the 310 injured Marines from Fallujah got surgery at our hospital in a 10-day period. Not one of those Marines died. When we invaded Iraq, every unit took with them their robust medical and surgical footprint. And this is what things looked like when I got to the war. While it's a good way to invade, it's not a good way to sustain care, because what was happening was casualties were going to the most local place instead of the most capable place that they needed the care to receive. And there was under triage, and we were losing casualties' lives because of that. And so what we did was took a look at this consequence of having fallen behind our civilian counterparts, leveraged the experience we had gained in peacetime in the civilian sector, and created a trauma system. Now, it's one of the best kept secrets in the war. We were at this for about 8 years before anybody realized we didn't have any authority to do anything. But they did listen to us, and eventually we got those guys the authority, as I had promised we would. So we leveraged that experience. The Department of Texas, you got to be proud of this. This was the Del Rio model of trauma care that we instituted, taken out of the San Antonio civilian trauma setting, and implemented a civilian type setting on top of that footprint in Iraq, so that we would send more patients to the most capable locations, fewer to those little outposts, and save resources and increase the capability of life-saving care at those large combat support hospitals. Then get these folks in the back of a transport aircraft and take them not across one continent, but an ocean to another continent as well. Those critical care air transport teams made all of this possible. Over 50,000 casualties have been transported on those aircraft and with those teams, and it's really a modern miracle, if you will. A surgeon out of the University of California, San Francisco, visited Germany and then flew one of those casualties home. She's got no military experience whatsoever, and her comment was, you take casualties who are so unstable in the back of an airplane across an ocean that I wouldn't dare put in my elevator in San Francisco General Hospital. And that's a great testament to the teamwork of those folks who can provide continuous care en route to those injured combatants. We don't get to have folks come home to have PTSD if we don't save their life on the battlefield up front. And so we've really implemented a fantastic system. And it takes a page out of an old playbook, the use of tourniquets. We implemented tourniquets, put tens of millions of dollars in tourniquets into the pockets of soldiers to go to the war, without any data, without any proof that it would work. We knew it was the right thing to do. Focused empiricism told us that, and subsequently we've been able to prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now, tourniquets are replete in civilian ambulances around this country, and we use them on a daily basis. Burns was a huge problem for us, and if we didn't have the right data repository, we would have made some mistakes. There were some unit of Marines out in Fallujah that wanted to have some Nomex uniforms to wear because they sensed that burn injuries were up. We helped to prove that to them and spent $25 million to put Nomex uniforms out there, and what happened was the incidence of major burns plummeted dramatically. Today, all of those uniforms that the soldiers are deployed with are made with Nomex. This is perhaps the biggest change that we made when we rediscovered the use of whole blood and how much that saves lives. If you look at the left of that screen, if we had done things just the way that we had been taught to do them back in our civilian training, the mortality rate for these patients requiring massive transfusion was very high. When we resorted to whole blood or the proper transfusion ratios of red cells and plasma and platelets, we knocked that mortality down drastically, better than our civilian counterparts. This today is a standard of care in every civilian trauma center in this country. These are those statistics that Commander Dellinger told you about the case fatality rates and the lower mortality rate, but let me put it to you in other terms. When you look at this graph, that top line is the injury severity. And over the course of this war, the enemy has figured out how to create bigger, better weapons. And the injuries that our casualties are sustaining are worse. We have the data to show that. But the mortality is not worse. It's the same because we have learned these lessons and implemented them. That has resulted in a change in combat mortality by a decrease of at least 25% for our casualties, and this is a concerted effort by all those folks that I've mentioned already. It comes at a cost. 3 surgeons that I worked with were all killed by rockets. I barely knew Major Taylor. I was good friends with Colonel Brian Allgood, and I trained with John Pryor, and we were better than comrades. Brian's wife made me promise, and John would want us to proceed along, to not settle for what we have done so far. So the future in what we have rests in doing research. As the combat actions are winding down, we have to turn to our civilian centers. We have to do this research. We must follow these casualties through their long-term outcomes in the Veterans Administration system of care. I'd like to just speak a minute about Mayo Clinic, where I work today, and its legacy. Shout out to the Minnesota Department, and especially my fellow Gophers, and the William T. McCoy post there in Rochester. Two of the founding members of that post in Rochester were William and Charles Mayo, and they founded the Mayo Clinic. 80 years ago this month, Franklin Delano Roosevelt came to Rochester and presented them, along with the National Commander of the American Legion, this award in Rochester, Minnesota. 5 years later, this summer, they both died. 50 years ago this summer, Chuck Mayo, Charlie Mayo's son, received this award. And it's just a fantastic legacy to carry on that is happening there in Rochester. Interestingly, the catchment area of our trauma center looks a lot like Afghanistan. And so we have continued to do research to help further the efforts in the combat zone. One of the studies that we were able to accomplish using plasma in the pre-hospital setting resulted in plasma being able to be used by our troops in Afghanistan to take out in the pre-hospital setting, something never done before. And so we've taken the military lesson learned, advanced that research in the civilian setting, and made it possible for the combatants to get that same level of care in that setting. So there's a new enthusiasm that's out there about this transfusion. Medicine is changing drastically, and we have several organizations that are working hard to make sure that these lessons get learned and that we advance the research. I sit on the Defense Health Board as the trauma surgeon that helps to advise the Secretary of Defense for Health Affairs. I'm the immediate past president of the National Trauma Institute, and we are working very closely with our colleagues in the American College of Surgeons, the American Association for the Surgery of Trauma, the Eastern Association for the Surgery of Trauma, and the Western Association for the Surgery of Trauma, as well as the NIH and the CDC, to make sure that funding becomes available. So when President Obama comes out later today, let's ask him to make sure that he puts $30 or $40 million in the President's budget next year to support trauma research funding so that we can bring even more folks home alive. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for this prestigious honor.